Welcome to Dairy Pod, a podcast series from Dairy Australia. Featuring a range of experts, each episode offers insights into Australia's unique dairy farming conditions, as well as personal experiences and the latest in dairy innovation.
Hello, my name's Jane Woolacott. I'm a farm engagement lead and extension advisor with Dairy Australia. And today I'm sitting down with my old friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Alexander. Peter is a veterinarian from Bega in New South Wales, and we're going to discuss some of the health and reproductive issues that can occur when cows calve in lower than ideal body condition. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us on Dairy Pod.
How are you, Jane? Good to be here.
Before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the dairy industry?
Well, I've lived in the Bega Valley for over 45 years. I've never left permanently. I've left periodically to do other things. At one point I was president of the Cattle Vets Association, spent some time teaching at the University of Sydney cattle reproduction, helped running prac classes, did some embryo transfer, had 10 years on and off of going up to Laos and Cambodia with Professor Peter Windsor, helping with volunteering and helping in some basic aid projects, teaching basic cattle husbandry to stock people in Laos and villages, and in Laos we taught their new vet students at one stage, which was great.
Well, that sounds like a really interesting and varying career. And I believe you also have a bit of a connection to dairying through your family.
That's right. Even though I've lived in the Bega Valley and really quite conscious of all year round calving, and we do have clients in the Bega Valley that have done batch calving, but my daughter and son-in-law are in Tasmania on the Cressy irrigation system, which is amazing and very large scale. And they're, of course, into seasonal calving, which my son-in-law loves because you can concentrate on each sector of the job properly and you're not sort of heat detecting every day and treating cows with milk fever every day and looking at LDAs every day. It's all sort of compartmentalised, and he thinks it's a lot better management, easy to manage in some ways.
Well, it sounds like you definitely have a good knowledge across both types of systems, so perfect person to talk to today. So today we're going to talk about body condition scores and how suboptimal body condition scores at calving can be a real risk, and particularly this year across some of the southern Australian dairy regions due to the very dry seasonal conditions we've been having. So Peter, coming from Bega, I know you've had your share of dry seasons and droughts over the years. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experiences with those?
Yes, well, for those people who don't know where Bega is, it's on the far south coast of New South Wales. It's over 400 kilometres south of Sydney. It's probably a 5 to 6 hour drive to get to Sydney in the north, and down the coast it's probably a 7 hour drive to get to Melbourne. And we're not many kilometres in from the coast, which probably dampens the extremes of weather that other places get. But the problem in the Bega Valley is the rainfall is unreliable. It's I've got friends in the Western District of Victoria and they talk about winter rain and spring rain, and farmers down in this neck of the woods are a little bit cautious about speaking like that because we're never more than 6 weeks away from a drought in the Bega Valley.
So let's start off by talking a little bit about body condition scores, just generally over the dry period and also at calving time. What's an ideal body condition score and what should farmers be aiming for?
Body scoring is a cheap way of estimating body reserves, as you know, and the confusing thing about body scores, I guess, is there's different numbers that different places in the world use, but if we do it out of 8, which is probably what most of us are used to in the dairy game in southern Australia, ideally at calving a cow should be between 4.5 and 5.5. And really we want the cows to dry off in that body condition score. We want them drying off in the body condition score that they're going to calve in, so that we actually want them to be between 4.5 and 5 at dry off. And if they're a bit light at dry off, then we have the opportunity to actively adjust the dry diet to make sure they reach their desired score at calving. Now, I managed to dig out the interim report of the in-calf project in 2001, sort of letting the cat out of the bag that I'm old, And it's really interesting. John Morton, who's an amazing epidemiologist and veterinarian, did some really good work on looking at all these things. And the number one thing that affects a cow's fertility coming into a breeding season is the body score they calved in it. And the other thing that Professor Ian Lane once said to me, and he's a bit of a guru nutritionist, if you borrow from the body score bank, which means you don't feed your cows enough and they lose body score, the cost of paying the bank back, the body score bank back, is a very high interest rate. Now, it's a pretty simple concept. I love it.
Yeah, I love that concept.
So if you're losing body score and you're not monitoring it and you suddenly wake up one morning and your cows are all poor, you've borrowed from the body score bank to produce the milk and you're going to have to pay it back at a very high interest rate.
Can we dive a little bit more deeply into that, Peter, and have a bit of a chat about what the cost of not getting that body condition score at calving right is? How bad is that impact on fertility at subsequent breeding?
Well, often the main impact is on fertility at subsequent breeding. As I was saying, we got this information from John Morton's in-calf study. Cows that calve in the ideal condition body score, which we were saying before, 4.5 to 5.5 range, have a 6-week in-calf rate or 100-day in-calf rate at least 12% higher than if they'd calved at a body score below 4.5.
Geez, 12%, that's really significant, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a little anecdote and I'll divert, but you can scrub it if you don't want it. I often say to farmers, if I snuck into your dairy at night and took $20,000 worth of straws out of your tank and snuck off, you'd suddenly realise you'd lost money and there'd be hell to pay.
Yep.
But when you don't see the money going off your farm, you can be losing much more than that. But it's not easy to see.
So is it absolute body condition score that's the main thing, or is it really to do with changes in body condition score? Have you got any thoughts on that?
I think from experience, you really don't want to be losing body condition score, and a slow motion loss at certain stages of the reproductive cycle is not as bad as excessive loss in early lactation. If you lose excessively in early lactation, the cows are going to take longer to cycle, have reduced submission and conception rates. The other interesting thing is cows in poor body condition have poor expression of heat signs.
So it's really common for cows to lose a little bit of body condition, directly after calving when they start to come in and be milked. Is there a number or is there an amount that, farmers should try to restrict that loss to?
I think there is. If you can try and reduce the body condition score loss in early lactation from 1 full score to 0.6 of a score across the herd, that's likely to result in a 3% higher 6-week or 100-day in-calf rate and reduce the non-in-calf rate by 2%.
What about later down the track in that lactation? Is there carryover effects from that poor fertility up front?
Yeah. Reduced fertility and conception rate due to poor body score at calving can then create really long-term problems. Like you might end up with increased cull rates in seasonal herds. It's no use having your calving start date on the 15th of July and 30% of your herd either not pregnant or not due to calve until September.
Yeah.
So that's a real problem in seasonal herds, and you end up, in all year round herds with extended lactations and sometimes lots of stale cows. So you've got cows that sort of at the end of their lactation, and as we both know, to maximise your profit, you want to have as many lactations from a cow per lifetime, and you want as many cows running in peak lactation rather than, a herd full of cows that are all stale.
Absolutely. And I suppose in the lactation, where they are in that poor body condition and become a bit stale, you're probably looking at potentially higher cell counts while they're stale, and even poorer feed conversion efficiency, which might, in a dry period lead to quite poor returns on investment for the feed you're purchasing to actually feed those cows. Thanks, Peter. I think that sort of is a really good coverage of the reproductive losses that can be associated with calving in a poor body condition score. But it's not just fertility that's affected, is it? There's other health complications that you see as well when cows are light at calving. Can you tell us about some of those things that you might have seen over the years that are not fertility related?
Well, I guess one of the things that always has snuck up on even very good dairy farmers is cows in advanced pregnancy, big Holstein cows, with big bull calves aboard or twins, and they look quite full in the abdomen, but they've actually lost body score. And they're a few weeks off calving and suddenly they're down on the ground and they're bright, and you give them milk fever solution or Ceton or something and they get up and walk around, but then they sit down again and eventually they just never get up. And they've got what I think in the books they talk about calling it starvation ketosis. Some people call it pregnancy toxemia, but I guess starvation ketosis is a more accurate thing. And the calf or the big bull calf's preferentially asking for the energy from mum, and then she struggles to maintain her body condition and her blood sugars, etc., and she ends up getting down and can't get up. And quite often these animals have to be shot. And over the years, on occasions, not very common, I haven't seen it lately, you'll find good farmers, suddenly they're hit with dry period, they think their dry cows are in sort of decent order because they've got big tummies, and suddenly one or two of them are down with ketosis, starvation ketosis. And that's a real problem. The other thing that we often see in runs is LDAs and RDAs, which is, right and left displacement of the abomasum, which is the fourth stomach. And there are ways of surgically correcting it, and there's laparoscopic ways as well. And this is probably related to low fibre. It's rarely seen in cattle on pasture and with decent amounts of fibre, but fibre seems to be a big thing. And when I first started practising a long time ago, my old boss said to me, "Petey, it's all about fibre. It's all about fibre."
So that's to do with the fill of the room is it? And the extra space in the abdomen?
Yeah, I'm not up to date with the pathophysiology of LDAs and RDAs, but I think you end up, if you're getting acidosis and low fibre, you get motility issues with the abomasum. But I think also the rumen, if you've got a smaller rumen pack, just mechanically you've got a less ballooning thing keeping everything in place. And I think there may be an element of that. I'm sure someone will bring up and say, hang on, you've got it all mixed up. But the reality is you see more LDAs and RDAs when there's not enough fibre about, when there's drought feeding. The other thing that's really interesting in our area, and going back a few years and years ago, there was a vet, an expert on dairy cattle and lameness called Chuck Gard, who came out and gave us a talk at one of our vet conferences, and we got him down to the Bega Valley and we took him out to some farms, and it was in the middle of the drought. And, we thought, Bruce and I thought at the time we were all over everything, and he looked at the cow's feet and he said, "Oh, you've got a lot of subclinical laminitis here in the cows." And he was looking at the feet and the rings and all this sort of stuff. And the reality is, when droughts came along in the old days, farmers would then start putting more and more grain through the bale and pulling the lever more and more times depending on how much feed was in the paddock. And of course, you're pulse feeding grain in those days, and now we use pellets and blended things and mixes. But the minute you start feeding high levels of concentrate in a drought, in a bale, you do run the risk of subclinical acidosis and acidosis.
So there really is a need during these dry times, isn't there, to make sure that you are balancing up that diet really well. And particularly, I guess, if you're using some of the cheaper feed supplements because you haven't got enough pasture availability or access to other fodder, it probably is a time to call on some specialist knowledge to really balance that diet out. I think we've talked well about the the obvious things with drought and poor body condition score here, but there are some other diseases and illnesses that we often do notice in drought time, aren't there, that might not be quite as front of mind?
Yeah, well, I think the botulism thing that we're talking about is one of them. I'm sure in the old days, if you'd wrapped up a snake or a rabbit in a bale of silage, or maybe even buried it in your pit, and the cow's chewing away on the bit of silage that's put out, the cow that chewed around that dead animal will just drop dead, and it'll be put down as a one-off, and someone will tell you it was a red belly or a lightning strike or something. And because there's no really obvious things on why it died, it's put down as that. But now that we're using mixer wagons and getting a bit more sophisticated, if you're using, say, round bale silage or wrap silage or silage, I guess, in general, and you have a dead animal in it and the botulism toxins in there, the problem with the mixer wagon is you evenly distribute the toxin throughout the whole of the wagon. So then when you feed it out, all the cows are going to get a dose of the toxin, and then it depends on what level the toxin's in and what happens. And we did have one herd that you were heavily involved in, Jane. These cows were just getting weak and dying, and they looked like milk fever, and all sorts of stuff was tested. And it was actually until you said, oh, what about botulism? And then we had a couple survive and we could reverse back and get some antibody tests done. But the reality is it was only the high producers that were getting sick and dying because they were eating more.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't the typical presentation, was it?
No. So
my recollection was that it was, sort of around dry times and they were feeding out more silage than they normally had.
Yeah, a completely atypical presentation. And, of course, you can vaccinate for botulism. So, that's something, again, you talk to your own vet about what vaccinations should you be doing in your area. So botulism's a classic. The other thing we've seen over the years in droughts is the dry cows are often standing around hay feeders or silage feeders, but if anybody's fed cattle, like I'm feeding my beef cows at the moment, you drop your bale of hay into the feeder, and even after 2 or 3 days, the area around the feeder is completely denuded of grass and they've defecated, and that's exactly where they like to sit. So you've got all these beautiful cows in the dry paddock that you've used dry cow on, and you think that's going to handle the previous subclinical mastitis, and then they sit down and grind their udders into the pool of bacteria around these feeders. So unless you're using teat seal and things like that, you can run into problems, and that won't 100% prevent necessarily this problem, but you've just got to be aware of where the cows are going to sit.
Yeah, we do tend to think of mastitis, don't we, in wet periods, but actually we often see a spike of it during really dry periods when we're feeding.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, of course, if you haven't got water troughs, nice clean water troughs, and the dams are slowly getting drier and drier, the cows actually wade through the mud, dragging their teats through the mud, and they're standing with their udders in this mud while they drink. Now, I'm sure most farmers haven't got that happening nowadays, but you can just see it. They've come out of the dairy. Yes, they might have been teat dipped, but the end of their street canal is still a bit open, and then they decide they're going to either sit down outside the dairy where there's no grass and there's heaps of cow manure and wait for the whole herd to move off. So that's a problem. And then if there's a dam with a lot of mud and a bit of water in the middle, that's a problem too.
So I think you said before, Peter, that body condition scoring is a really cheap and easy thing to do, but it can take a while for that body condition to change noticeably, and you alluded to that. It can sneak up on farmers that there's been a decrease. Are there some other triggers or early warning signs that cows might not be getting enough energy that farmers could take note of?
There's a lot to be gained, I think, from looking at what's in the milk fat. And there's, before we get on to that, you can get fluke tests done, you can find out about where your pestivirus is up to, you can get, mastitis, bug PCRs. So, there's a lot of checking the dairy's pulse by looking at milk available. And one of the things that can be looked at in early lactation is the fat-protein ratios, which is an indicator of energy balance. And there's certain ratios that are looked at, and milk fat protein ratios in milk between 1 and 1.5 have been considered to be sort of your baseline normal in Holstein cows, and that's regarded as fine. But if it goes a greater than 1.5, you've got cows with greater body score loss or lower body weight gain. So you can look at this fat protein ratio score to look at more subtle ways of heading things off before they blow up in your face.
And I think a lot of the herd recording or herd test people will run those tests forward as part of the normal herd test.
Exactly.
What other kind of technologies do you think about these days?
Yeah, again, a lot of our farmers have gone to the collars that, I guess the main reason they've gone to them is for heat detection, and looking at heat detection in all year-round herds, it's, a big job. And if you're using AI and it's all year round and you're not running big synchronisation programs, the collars, that's one of their big selling points. But the other thing is measuring rumination, and the different people selling the collars have got, quite good information on rumination and what's normal rumination in a cow and what's not. And if their rumination drops, that can be an indication of a problem with nutrition.
Absolutely. So I think a figure I heard was that cows normally ruminate for between about 450 and 550 minutes in each 24-hour periods. And so you're saying that if they drop below about that 450 minutes of rumination each day, then maybe their feed intake hasn't been sufficient. And
Exactly. So this is all relatively new stuff. And I think the companies that are selling collars are getting bigger and bigger databases from a worldwide base to help farmers.
So, Peter, one thing that people may not have thought about in terms of using collars is how they can use those collars to monitor their dry cows, assuming that the dry cows have got collars on and that the antenna for transmission does reach out to the dry paddock. But I believe they can be fairly useful for monitoring cows in the dry paddock in terms of their rumination levels and therefore their feed intake. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, you can look at the average rumination times of the dry cow mob and then watch for trends over time. And again, this goes back to what we were saying about using the capacity of the program. So if the rumination times of the whole group are trending down, that might indicate they're not getting enough food on offer to the whole mob. And, the farmer might need to consider changing paddocks, if there's a fresh one available, changing stocking rates or upping, the supplementary feed.
A lot of our southern regions for dairying at the moment are probably in the middle of calving their cows down. Have you got any advice for farmers who are already in the middle of calving and might be concerned about the condition of their cows?
Yeah, I guess I do. And I guess this goes back to my general philosophy of being a country vet. And young vets are always amazed at whose phone numbers I've got on my mobile. And I think probably the best advice I can give here, because I'm, just a country cow vet, I'm not a guru on a lot of these matters, is you need to get a network of people that you can call on almost at a moment's notice who are very knowledgeable in certain areas. So in my job, if I've got some weird problem in a fairy penguin, I know I can ring a guy up who used to vet that used to work at SeaWorld, or if I've got a rabbit that's got something, I can ring so-and-so, and if there's a valuable horse, I can ring so-and-so. And this is exactly what you need to be doing as a dairy farmer. So, you really want to have a team of people that you've developed networks with and that are sort of almost mentors, and there's a range of them. I mean, financial counsellors have got some amazing ways of helping you manage your finances if you're running into trouble. There's some farm consultants out there that have got massive experience in dealing with these issues and looking at your total budget and what's realistic and what's not. Veterinarians, you really do need to have in my book, of course I'd say this, you need to have a good relationship with your local vet and, in New South Wales, your LLS vets, and down in Victoria, your government vets or your own vets, and, straight nutritionists and agronomists. And having a really good network is probably the most important thing I could say to anybody in any sort of strife. And, whether it's a mental health issue, an animal disease issue, body score issue, you just really want a network of people that you can just pick up your mobile phone, press a button and start talking to someone. And if you haven't got a network, you can call, say, someone like Jane from Dairy Australia, farm engagement lead, and you guys are really lucky. I mean, Jane is a serious dairy vet, and now she's down there working for Dairy Australia, so she knows who to ring, and there's lots of other people in Dairy Australia like Jane, and you can start there and get pointed in the right direction. I think that's the best advice I could give anyone, is to have people you can ring.
Thanks, Peter. That's really great advice. And I think we all recognise that when you're under that stressful situation, it can be really hard to have that space in your head to make those decisions yourself and to rely on your own knowledge, and having that network in place is absolutely vital. It's also really important during stressful times to look after your own physical and mental health. And remember that tough decisions relate not only to the welfare of your cows, but also to your staff and your family and yourself. So Peter, I really appreciate you joining us on Dairy Pod today and sharing your knowledge and experience. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you for joining today's Dairy Pod episode. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. For more information, check out the episode notes. You can stay up to date by following Dairy Pod on your favourite podcast platform. To get in touch, visit dairyaustralia.com.au. Until next time, take care.